The first time someone blames you for something you never did, your mind hesitates. You do not push back. You try to explain. You try to reason. But somewhere in that moment, something darker is happening. That person is not reacting to you. They are rejecting a version of themselves, and you have become the canvas for their rejection. The human mind, when threatened by shame, fear, or guilt, looks for a place to unload. That place, more often than not, is another person. What appears to be a simple accusation is not always rooted in facts or fairness. It is rooted in survival. This is the beginning of projection. A parent tells a child they are selfish, while never noticing how their own actions orbit only their personal needs. A boss accuses an employee of laziness, while spending hours every day avoiding their own responsibilities. A friend points out your flaws with a tone of urgency, while blind to the mirror of their own broken patterns. In each of these moments, a manipulation tactic is unfolding. The blame game becomes a ritual of self-protection. It hides the truth beneath a story that feels easier to believe. You are the problem. They are not. You are the reason. They are the victim. And this illusion becomes their relief. Projection is not always calculated. It is not always planned, but it is deeply rooted in how people cope. The more disturbing the emotion they carry, the more likely they are to eject it into someone else. You become the emotional trash bin of their unconscious pain. This is not just unfair, it is dangerous. Over time, this becomes normalized. Society rewards those who accuse faster, cry louder, and speak with moral certainty, even if the morality is borrowed from their own wounds. The one who receives the blame begins to doubt themselves, not realizing they are only carrying someone else's psychological projection. But what if this entire system of blame is more than just emotional chaos? What if it is a design, a tactic, a dark psychology that allows people to control narratives and avoid self-awareness? What if the ones who blame the most are not the most hurt, but the most hidden? There is something we all need to see about manipulation tactics and the blame game, and it begins with one question we rarely ask ourselves. Stay with this story until the end. The real answer has never been about who was right. It has always been about who was running from themselves. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, yet most people never look inward. They believe what they were taught, that blame is about justice, that blame is about truth, that when someone points a finger, it must be for a reason, and if they speak loud enough, it must be because they are right. This is the lie we grow up with, the lie that blame is a sign of strength, that blaming others proves moral clarity, that calling someone out is the same as standing up for something true. It is not. The truth is darker. Blame, more often than not, is not a pursuit of truth. It is a reaction to discomfort, a release valve for unbearable emotions, a psychological strategy to avoid facing the real cause of internal pain. And the tool most commonly used for this release is projection. Projection is not a rare behavior. It is one of the oldest psychological defense mechanisms, first described by Sigmund Freud. In essence, it is the process of taking your unwanted feelings, your thoughts, your impulses, and attributing them to someone else. You accuse them of what you cannot accept in yourself. You may believe that the person blaming you has evidence, that they have clarity, that their emotion gives them authority. But what if their emotion is not about the situation at all? What if it is residue from a childhood wound they never processed, a memory they buried, a behavior they hate in themselves? In this twisted exchange, projection creates a manipulation tactic that disguises itself as moral judgment. The accuser becomes a false witness, the blamed becomes a target of someone else's internal war, and the world continues to reward the louder voice. You have seen this. A partner who cheats accuses you of disloyalty, a liar who calls you dishonest, a person who constantly disrespects others, claiming they are always being disrespected. These are not isolated cases. They are patterns, repetitions of a mind unable to sit with guilt. So instead, it exports it. Blame becomes less about holding people accountable and more about finding someone else to carry the emotional weight. This is why projection survives. It feels safer than reflection. But when we believe the lie of blame, when we assume accusations are pure, we give our minds over to manipulation. We stop questioning intent. We stop noticing patterns. We stop seeing ourselves clearly. Manipulation tactics thrive in silence. Projection survives in unawareness. And the blame game becomes a loop that keeps the truth buried beneath layers of denial. If you have ever felt the sting of false blame, if you have ever wondered why someone accused you with such intensity, you are not alone. But the answer is not where you were told to look. Before we continue, if this has struck something deep inside you, take a moment to reflect. Share your experience in the comments. Someone else might read your story and see their own reflection. Like the video, subscribe if you are drawn to this unraveling, and stay until the end. The mask of blame is only beginning to crack. The human mind has many ways of protecting itself. Some are healthy, some are destructive. Among the most deceptive is projection. It does not scream, it does not scream, it does not threaten. It simply shifts what is unbearable inside one person onto someone else, then pretends it was always theirs to begin with. Psychological projection is not just a term in a textbook. It is a living force that shapes relationships, decisions, reputations, and identities. It is subtle, it is powerful, it is often invisible to the one doing it. That is what makes it dangerous. Sigmund Freud first introduced the concept, describing how people defend themselves from their own unacceptable desires by attributing them to others. A person feeling envy might claim you are the jealous one. A person feeling shame might say you are too critical. A person with anger they do not understand might accuse you of being hostile. Carl Jung took it further. He believed projection was a core function of the psyche's shadow, the dark part of ourselves that we refuse to see. What we reject in ourselves does not disappear. It simply finds a new face, and that face often belongs to someone we know. Think about how often people are quick to judge others for the very things they struggle with privately. A controlling parent accusing their child of rebellion, a partner who demands honesty while hiding secrets, a leader who speaks of values while manipulating the system behind closed doors. These are not coincidences, they are projections. Projection becomes a defense mechanism, one that keeps people from collapsing under the weight of self-awareness. If you cannot accept your flaws, you will have to find them somewhere else. And when that need becomes urgent, the mind plays a trick. It convinces itself that the threat is outside, that the guilt is yours, that the problem never belonged to them. This illusion is easy to maintain because it feels true. Emotion adds force. When someone blames you with passion, you hesitate, you begin to doubt, you search for the mistake they claim to see. Even if you did nothing wrong, their intensity makes you wonder if you missed something. That is the power of projection. It manipulates not just through words, but through emotional weight. It blurs the boundary between self and other, between reality and reaction. Over time, if left unexamined, projection becomes identity. People forget they are projecting. They believe they are righteous. They believe they are protecting themselves. But all they are doing is building a psychological wall between their truth and their awareness. And when enough people build that wall, a society of projection begins to form. The blame game becomes normalized. The accused are silenced. The accusers are believed. And the real self remains hidden behind layers of denial and defense. This is where manipulation tactics begin to thrive. Not in evil intentions, but in unconscious avoidance. And once that process becomes habitual, it rewires how people behave, how they love, how they speak, how they survive. If you have ever walked away from an argument feeling blamed for something that felt unfamiliar to your character, you may have been the surface where someone else's darkness was placed. There is something more disturbing behind this. Not just that people project, but that some learn to use it as a weapon. You will see how. But first, understand this. Projection does not protect truth. It protects pain from being seen. When blame is repeated enough times, it begins to sound like truth. When projection is used often enough, it becomes a habit of survival. But when both are used together, over and over, they form something far more deliberate. This is where manipulation tactics begin. This is where the blame game becomes a strategy. In psychological terms, projection was never meant to hurt others. It was meant to shield the self. But some people, especially those who thrive on control, begin to realize how effective it is. They learn that blaming others removes attention from their own flaws. They learn that projecting emotions creates confusion. They learn that manipulating truth allows them to keep power. This is not a theory. It is a behavior seen in abusive relationships, toxic workplaces, and even public discourse. The manipulator rarely says, "I am wrong." Instead, they say, "You made me act this way. You brought this on yourself. You are the one who changed." In these moments, projection is not just a mistake. It is a weapon, a way to dismantle the other person's confidence while maintaining the illusion of moral authority. This tactic is common in narcissistic behavior. Research shows that individuals with narcissistic tendencies often use blame and projection to avoid shame. By deflecting responsibility, they preserve their fragile self-image. But in doing so, they distort the perception of everyone around them. Emotional manipulation thrives on imbalance. One person speaks with certainty, the other is left questioning their memory, their intentions, even their identity. This process is known as gaslighting. It begins with small doubts, then grows into a full-blown rewriting of reality, and it is almost always accompanied by projection. The one who accuses you of being selfish is often the one who takes without giving. The one who says you are unstable might be hiding their own emotional chaos. The one who insists you are manipulative may be using that very label to control how others see you. Over time, this pattern breaks down the mind of the person on the receiving end. The more you hear the accusations, the more you wonder if they are true. This is not weakness. It is a natural response to psychological stress. The brain is wired to seek clarity, but when clarity is denied, confusion becomes a cage. This is how projection becomes dangerous. It is not just an internal process, it is a contagious distortion, and those who master it can shape how others feel, how they think, how they see themselves. You might wonder how many arguments you have had that were never truly yours. How many emotional wounds you carry that began with someone else's unresolved past. How many times you apologized for something that did not come from you. Manipulation tactics are not always loud. They do not always come with threats or commands. Sometimes they arrive as blame, quiet, sharp, familiar. And if you are not careful, they will make you rewrite your entire story. But the question is not whether projection exists. It is whether we can see it before it rewrites us. The next pattern will reveal how the one who is guilty makes you feel like you are the one who needs to be forgiven. There is a moment in every manipulated mind when guilt becomes unbearable, not because it is real, but because it feels real. You replay the conversation, you examine every word, you ask yourself if you could have been more kind, more patient, more careful, but somewhere beneath that questioning, the truth remains untouched. The guilt was never yours to begin with. This is the silent cruelty of psychological projection. It does not just assign blame, it transfers guilt. It moves the emotional burden from one person to another, like a disease that spreads without sound. The person who cannot sit with their shame quietly offers it to you, wrapped in accusation, and you, not knowing what to do with it, begin to carry it. Defense mechanisms are not random. They are built from fear, from trauma, from unresolved internal war. One of the most common mechanisms, especially in those with deep emotional wounds, is the projection of guilt. It is easier to claim someone else hurt you than to admit you hurt them. It is safer to say someone disrespected you than to accept your own insecurities. Research in cognitive dissonance theory explains this clearly. When a person acts in ways that conflict with their values or self-image, the mind becomes stressed. This discomfort pushes the person to change the story. To reduce the tension, the mind shifts blame outward. It creates an enemy to protect the self. The target of this shift becomes the scapegoat. You are that scapegoat. You are the person who now carries the unresolved guilt of someone else's inner conflict. This is not just emotional, it is philosophical. Jean-Paul Sartre called it bad faith, a state where a person deceives themselves in order to avoid facing the full weight of their freedom and responsibility. Projection, in this context, is a denial of agency. It is the refusal to own the consequences of one's choices. In abusive dynamics, this process becomes a system. The one who harms others accuses others of harm. The one who violates boundaries insists they are being violated. Over time, the accused begins to shrink. They silence their voice. They question their reality. They lose connection to who they were before the guilt was handed to them. This is not a mistake. It is a method, a manipulation tactic that creates a false moral high ground. The person who blames feels powerful. The person who is blamed feels broken, and the truth remains buried beneath layers of emotional misdirection. You may have been told that you are too sensitive, that you take things the wrong way, that your memory is unreliable. But what if none of that was ever about you? What if every time someone made you question yourself, they were protecting a version of themselves they could not bear to face? Blame becomes a tool, projection becomes a shield, guilt becomes a weapon, and you, unaware of the game, begin to play your role in silence. You do not need to keep carrying that guilt. It was not born in your choices. It was transferred from someone else's refusal to face their own. But if you want to recognize it, you have to start seeing the patterns. And those patterns are everywhere, in relationships, in family, in the news, in the mirror. The question is no longer whether you were blamed unfairly. The question is how often this happens around you, every day, hidden behind normal words. The everyday world is filled with projection, and if you cannot spot it, you will keep mistaking it for truth. Projection is not just a psychological term, it is a daily event. It does not only live in therapy rooms or textbooks, it lives in kitchens, in group chats, in offices, in late-night arguments behind closed doors. The truth is, you already know what projection looks like. You just did not know its name. You see it in the family member who constantly accuses others of being ungrateful, while they themselves never say thank you. You see it in the friend who warns you not to trust people, while they twist every truth to suit their narrative. You see it in the colleague who claims to be the victim of drama, but seems to be present in every toxic situation. These are not small misunderstandings. These are expressions of manipulation tactics operating under the radar, and in the center of them is the blame game, disguised as emotional honesty. In many homes, projection becomes generational. Parents who never dealt with their own trauma pass it on as blame. They shame their children for behaviors that reflect their own suppressed identities. A controlling father may criticize his son for being weak, when he himself was never allowed to express emotion. A mother who spent her life ignoring her needs may call her daughter selfish for asking for space. In workplaces, the same pattern emerges. Leaders who cannot face their own incompetence blame the team. Employees who fear failure sabotage others, then claim they were mistreated. Gossip becomes a vehicle for projection, and over time, an entire culture of fear and accusation forms. Society mirrors these patterns at scale. Public outrage often begins with a projection, a single story, twisted into a symbol of someone's inner frustration. Social media has amplified this cycle. People are not reacting to what happened. They are reacting to what that event triggered inside them. What they see in the other is often what they deny in themselves. Studies in group psychology support this. When people feel powerless or ashamed, they are more likely to dehumanize others. Projection becomes a collective behavior, a mass disowning of flaws, a shared illusion of righteousness. This is why projection is so difficult to fight. It does not look like violence. It does not feel like a lie. It wears the face of someone you love, someone you trust, someone who may not even realize what they are doing. But if you look closely, you will see the signs. A mismatch between the accusation and reality. A pattern that repeats itself in different forms. A person who blames everyone but never pauses to reflect. These are not coincidences, they are symptoms. And you, if you are not aware, become the one who suffers quietly. You walk away wondering what you did wrong, while carrying emotions that were never yours. Everyday horror does not come from strangers. It comes from those who know your name, those who know your past, those who know where your mind bends and where your heart hesitates. These are the people who project onto you, not out of evil, but out of fear. But fear, left unacknowledged, becomes a dangerous force. And in the hands of someone skilled in deflection, that fear becomes your prison. The next time someone accuses you with intensity, do not respond immediately. Watch them, listen, observe the gap between what they say and what you feel. That gap may be the doorway to the truth. The real answer will not be spoken. It will be hidden in silence, and what you find in that silence may change how you see everyone around you. You have likely been told that those who confront others are brave, that calling someone out is a sign of courage, that expressing anger is healthy. But what if those expressions, in some cases, are not truth speaking itself, but denial in disguise? What if the one who accuses you is not revealing clarity, but running from their own shadow? Carl Jung called it the shadow self, the part of the psyche that holds all the traits we deny, suppress, or reject. It is not evil, it is repressed. It includes thoughts we consider unacceptable, emotions we do not want to feel, and desires we pretend never existed. Projection is the shadow's loudest language. When a person points a finger with conviction, they may be revealing the very thing they cannot face in themselves. But because the mind cannot see its own blind spots, it places the unwanted feeling into someone else. This becomes the foundation of the manipulation tactic. The blame game serves as the mask. The projection becomes the script. The performance is convincing because the actor does not know they are performing. Philosophically, this raises a disturbing possibility. If the one who attacks you is merely reflecting their inner world, then most interpersonal conflict is not about the facts, but about internal realities spilling into shared space. Arguments then become collisions of unhealed parts. In modern psychology, this is confirmed by studies in emotional reactivity. When someone is triggered, their nervous system bypasses rationality. They respond not to the present, but to unresolved pain. Their accusations often reveal more about their history than about your actions. Have you ever been blamed for being cold, right after setting a boundary? Have you been called arrogant, immediately after standing up for yourself? Have you been accused of manipulation, only because you refuse to be manipulated? These are not random misinterpretations, they are acts of shadow projection. The accuser feels threatened by something you represent, not because you are wrong, but because your presence disturbs their equilibrium. Your confidence exposes their equilibrium. Your confidence exposes their insecurity. Your honesty triggers their self-deception. Your peace reminds them of the storm they have ignored. In these moments, the blame game takes shape. The projection becomes fuel. The goal is not resolution. The goal is expulsion. The accuser wants to eject the discomfort they cannot tolerate. And you, if you are not grounded, become the vessel that holds it. This is how psychological projection hides itself behind intensity. The more emotional the accusation, the more urgent it feels. But urgency is not always truth. Sometimes it is a cover, a way to distract from the root. You are not required to absorb another person's shadow. You are not required to take in what they have rejected, but you must learn to see the pattern. The next time someone projects onto you, ask yourself silently, what are they not ready to face? Do not say it aloud. Do not confront them with their own mirror. That will only increase the projection. Just watch, see the mechanism unfold, and choose, in that moment, not to become the stage for their unresolved truth. What if the real healing begins? Not when you fight the accuser, but when you stop letting their shadow define your identity. There is a skill in learning to detect projection. but there is a deeper wisdom in refusing to carry it. That wisdom is what we will now step into, not to fight, but to see, because once you see it, you can never be fooled the same way again. If you want to protect yourself from manipulation, you must learn to see what others cannot. Not what they say, not what they show, but what they are trying to hide. Projection is not always loud. It often arrives through silence, through tension, through a subtle twist of logic that makes you question who you are. To recognize projection, you must begin with patterns. Watch for repetition. When someone accuses others of the same flaw, again and again, in different situations, that is a signal. When they never examine their own role, when every conflict leads to blame, when every loss becomes someone else's fault, you are not seeing truth, you are seeing avoidance. A key sign is emotional mismatch. If their reaction is 10 times larger than the situation requires, pause. Ask yourself what that intensity might be protecting. Projection often enters with exaggerated emotion because the mind is defending something it cannot name. Another clue lies in contradictions. The person who demands loyalty but betrays trust. The one who speaks of peace but creates conflict. The one who insists they are misunderstood, yet makes no effort to understand others. These are not simply human flaws, they are signs of unacknowledged shadow. Pay attention to language. Projection often comes through statements that sound absolute. You always do this. Everyone sees it. Nobody can trust you. These phrases are not observations, they are defenses. They are walls of certainty built to cover inner confusion. In studies on high-conflict personalities, projection appears as a dominant trait. People who consistently blame others tend to have fragile egos, low distress tolerance, and poor self-awareness. They use blame as a way to preserve self-image, even if that means distorting every relationship around them. Recognizing this requires emotional discipline. Your first impulse might be to defend yourself, to correct the accusation, to argue the truth. But projection cannot be undone by debate. It resists logic. It feeds on your emotional response. The more you react, the more real the projection becomes in their mind. Instead, pause. Do not explain. Do not chase their approval. Observe. Name the behavior to yourself, not to them. Hold your center. This is not silence out of fear. It is silence as strategy. It is knowing that not every accusation deserves an answer. Not every attack requires a shield. Sometimes the best protection is detachment. But do not mistake detachment for numbness. You must feel what is happening. You must recognize when your body tenses, when your mind spirals, when your heart begins to shrink under the weight of projected guilt. These are not signs of weakness. They are signals that you are under psychological attack. This is not about becoming paranoid. It is about becoming aware. Projection is one of the most common manipulation tactics, and the blame game is its stage. The more you can see through the performance, the less you will be pulled into the script. The deeper question now is not whether you can recognize projection in others. It is whether you are willing to recognize it in yourself. That is whether you are willing to recognize it in yourself. That is where the real transformation begins. That is where the mirror becomes clear, and in that reflection, you may see something that changes your life. It is easy to spot projection in others. It is far more difficult to recognize it in yourself, because when you project, it does not feel like projection. It feels like truth. It feels justified. It feels real. But underneath that feeling is a quiet distortion, a shadow you have not named. You do not blame because you are cruel. You blame because it is easier. It is easier to say they disrespected you than to admit you feel insecure. It is easier to say they abandoned you than to admit your fear of being unwanted. It is easier to say they were unfair than to sit with the guilt of your own mistakes. This is not just human error. It is the psychology of avoidance. When the mind cannot handle certain emotions, it finds someone else to carry them. You do not mean to project, but you do. We all do. It is a built-in reflex, a shield disguised as judgment. Carl Jung warned that we all walk around with parts of ourselves that we cannot see. The longer we ignore them, the stronger they grow, and in time they find their way into the world, through words, through blame, through the pain we place on others. This is where personal responsibility begins. Not in guilt, not in shame, but in awareness. You must begin to ask yourself the most painful questions. What am I accusing others of, that I secretly fear in myself? What flaws do I see too quickly in others, while ignoring them in my own behavior? What part of me feels too fragile to admit the truth? You may feel resistance. That is normal. The ego does not want to dissolve. It wants to survive, and projection is one of its favorite tools. You are not alone in this. Every human being projects. The difference is whether you remain unconscious or choose to wake up. That choice changes everything. It does not mean you stop seeing faults in others. It means you stop assuming those faults belong only to them. It means you examine the source of your emotions. It means you take the mirror away from others and turn it toward yourself. Studies in emotional intelligence have shown that people who take time to reflect on their own reactions are more resilient, more stable, and less likely to fall into toxic cycles. But reflection requires courage, because once you see your own projections, you can never unsee them. If you are ready to begin this process, write one sentence right now, one sentence that names something you have accused others of, which may also live within you. Be honest, be private, if needed, but be real. This is not confession, it is recognition, and recognition is the first step to breaking the blame cycle. The moment you stop pushing guilt onto others, you begin to feel lighter, not because you are free of flaws, but because you are no longer afraid to hold them. Projection loses power when seen. Manipulation fails when understood. The blame game ends when you stop playing. But this is not the end. There is something else behind projection, a deeper psychological force, a fear most people cannot name, and those who learn to see it find a different kind of freedom, the kind that comes not from control, but from truth. Blame is not just a reaction, it is a story we tell ourselves to stay safe, a story we build when the truth becomes too heavy. It feels like honesty, it looks like certainty, but behind that polished surface is a fracture, a quiet lie, hidden beneath what we believe to be truth. When people blame others through projection, they are not seeking clarity, they are seeking relief, and in that search for relief, they distort the truth to suit the emotion they cannot regulate. The facts become flexible, the story shifts, the roles change, but the purpose stays the same. Protect the self, avoid the wound, shift the weight. You may think the manipulator wants to win, but that is not their first desire. Their first desire is to escape. Escape the part of themselves they cannot tolerate. Escape the shame they buried long ago. Escape the responsibility of their own choices. This is what makes the blame game so destructive. It is not about disagreement. It is about identity protection. And when identity is threatened, people will sacrifice truth to save their sense of self. Philosophers have wrestled with this dynamic for centuries. Friedrich Nietzsche spoke of the way people disguise weakness as morality. Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of self-deception and bad faith. Hannah Arendt warned how evil can take root in ordinary minds, through ordinary justifications. When someone projects, they are not evil, but they are hiding. And when hiding becomes a pattern, it turns into harm. Not always intentional, but harm nonetheless. The scariest part is how natural it feels. The projection fits. The blame seems deserved. You replay the moment, and everything points outward, until something deep inside begins to whisper that the story may not be true. You must learn to hear that whisper. It is the signal that you are stepping out of the illusion, that you are beginning to see the architecture of psychological projection, the structure of manipulation, the foundation of the blame game. This does not mean you stop defending yourself. It means you defend yourself. It means you defend yourself with clarity, not confusion. You know when the guilt is not yours. You know when the emotion does not belong to you. You know when someone else's chaos is not your responsibility. And if you ever begin to project, if the fear becomes too loud, if the wound surfaces again, you pause, you breathe, you take responsibility, not because you are weak, but because you are awake. This is the kind of awareness that rewires how you speak, how you argue, how you relate. It is not easy. It takes practice, but it is possible. You do not have to fight everyone. You do not have to expose every manipulator. You only have to stop playing the game. That is how you win, by not joining the performance, by seeing the script for what it is. And once you see it, you begin to notice something else. The deeper fear that drives it all, the fear that is rarely spoken, the one that lives behind every blame, every accusation, every projection. That fear is the final key, and what it reveals is not just psychology, it is humanity, stripped bare. There is a reason people project. It is not just about manipulation, it is not only about control. At the heart of it all, there is fear. Not the kind of fear that screams, but the kind that whispers in the dark. The kind that shapes behavior without being seen. The kind that turns honesty into danger and truth into risk. This fear is old. It begins in childhood, when the self first learns what is acceptable and what is not. When certain emotions are punished, dismissed, or ignored. The child learns quickly to be loved. They must hide parts of who they are. They must edit the self. They must bury what is real. As the child grows, the strategy deepens. Those buried parts begin to show up in others. The anger they were not allowed to feel, the sadness they were told to suppress, the envy they were shamed for having. All of it begins to live outside them. And when someone triggers that memory, the reaction is not reason, it is fear. That fear says, if I face this now, I will lose who I am. If I admit this, I will collapse. If I let go of the lie, I will become what I feared all along. Projection is not just a psychological trick. It is a way to survive when the mind feels threatened. It is the emergency exit from the burning room of self-awareness. But what people do not realize is that they never escape the fire. They only bring it into someone else's life. You've felt this. The moment someone lashes out without explanation. The moment they twist a simple disagreement into a moral failure. The moment they say, "You are the problem," with eyes that do not blink. These are not attacks based on reason. These are reactions based on fear. Modern psychology confirms this pattern. Emotional regulation studies show that people with unresolved trauma are more likely to externalize their distress. They cannot sit with discomfort. They must move it. And the fastest way to move it is to throw it at someone else. Fear turns into blame. Blame turns into projection. And projection becomes a cycle that repeats until someone breaks it. That someone could be you. But breaking the cycle means facing your own fears. It means asking, what part of me am I afraid to admit? What truth do I silence? Because it does not fit my image. What emotion do I avoid? Because it reminds me of something I promised never to feel again. These are not easy questions. They should not be. Growth is not soft. It is sharp. It cuts away the illusion. It reveals the raw. But only through that process can you stop being a participant in the blame game. Only through that process can you stop being a carrier of projections. You do not need to be perfect. You only need to be honest. And in that honesty, you begin to disarm the fear, slowly, gently, repeated. What you fear in others may be something you abandoned in yourself. What you accuse may be what you once were. What you hate may be what you have not yet healed. That realization is not an end, it is a beginning. A door into something deeper than analysis, deeper than blame, deeper than fear. It is the doorway to freedom, but not everyone is ready to walk through it. The final step is not about answers, it is about awareness. And what you choose to do with that awareness will shape every connection you have from this moment forward. At some point, you will stand still, the voices will fade, the justifications will run out, and in that quiet moment, you will face the one person you cannot outrun yourself. No more targets, no more scapegoats, No more twisted versions of other people used to protect your narrative, just you. The projection ends here. This is not punishment, it is invitation. The mirror you avoided has not disappeared. It has been waiting, not to shame you, but to show you what is still unfinished, what is still unresolved, what is still unspoken. When you stop blaming others, you begin to notice what the blame was hiding. Disappointments, failures, deep-rooted shame, moments in your past that still sting when remembered, relationships you sabotaged, opportunities you lost, because you were protecting a version of yourself that no longer exists. You may not like what you see. That is the point. Growth is not built on comfort. It is built on clarity. And clarity comes only when the illusions fall away, when you no longer confuse projection with truth, when you no longer confuse intensity with certainty, when you no longer confuse blame with moral strength. You are not just the receiver of projections, you are also the source of them, and that truth is not something to fear, it is something to honor. Because once you know it, you can begin to change. That change does not happen overnight. It happens in the quiet decision to stop participating in the manipulation tactics, to stop using the blame game to avoid discomfort, to stop unloading what you do not want to feel into someone else's identity. You will still feel the urge. You will still want to say, it is their fault. You will still want to shift the weight. But now, you will know. Now you will recognize the trick. That is the difference between those who stay asleep and those who begin to wake up. You have seen the structure. You have seen the shadow. You have walked through the maze of psychological projection. You have heard the scream behind the silence, the guilt behind the accusations, the fear behind the control. Now you choose not to fix others, not to expose them, but to stop offering your own shadow to the world, to sit with it, to name it, to heal it. The end of projection is not the end of emotion. It is the beginning of true reflection, and that reflection will shape how you move, how you speak, how you love, how you lead. You may still be blamed, you may still be misunderstood, but inside you will know. The truth is not outside you. It never was. If this journey revealed something real inside you, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who is caught in the cycle, someone who is carrying guilt that never belonged to them, or projecting pain they were never taught how to process. Subscribe if you want to go further. There are more dark truths, more unseen forces, more games the mind plays that no one talks about. Not everyone wants to wake up, but if you do, you are not alone. Comment below, write what part of you is ready to stop hiding. This is not for applause. This is for honesty. This is how the cycle breaks. And it begins with you.